This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. All right, thank you so much for joining us this evening. So my name's Nora, I work for the Thurston Conservation District, and we are gonna get started this evening with our workshop on tips for buying farmland. I'm very happy to be joined by Lizzie and Suzanne from NRCS. I'll let them introduce themselves in a moment, and my coworker Marguerite, I will also let introduce herself. I wanna do just a little bit of housekeeping as we get started. I mentioned I'm recording this workshop, so a link to that will be made available at the end, probably tomorrow afternoon or so. I'll email that out to everyone. I will also be using these closed captioning, as you can see at the bottom here. They do a pretty good job of capturing what we're saying accurately, but they sometimes mess up, especially proper nouns. So just be forewarned. And hopefully those will transfer between our presenters this evening pretty well. We are going to use that comment box for questions, and then we can also take vocal questions at the end as well. I'd ask if you please keep yourself muted during the presentation. You're welcome to have your camera on or off, whatever you're comfortable with is just fine. If you're experiencing bandwidth issues, definitely try turning off your camera. That should help. Our workshop this evening is with NRCS, as I mentioned, and I'll let them kind of introduce themselves. We're going to get started by talking a little bit about the Thurston Conservation District. If you're not familiar with the district, get you introduced to us a little bit. Then I'm going to hand it off to Lizzie and Suzanne, who are going to discuss some ways of checking out property prior to purchasing it. And then we'll close this evening by talking about some programs and services from the Conservation District specifically that might help you when you're on some new property or acquiring property. Additionally, I've compiled a Google Drive. All of our presenters have added to that to share resources and tools that might be helpful, kind of the equivalent of handouts at a workshop. So I will make a link to that available after the fact. I'll put it in the chat at the end of the workshop, and then I'll also share that directly with the recording from this workshop as well. All right. So this, as I said, this workshop is being hosted this evening by the Thurston Conservation District, and my name is Nora. I'm the Education and Outreach Specialist there. I am super happy to be able to host these workshops online. It's been really fun to connect with people this way in the last year, and was really excited to be approached by Lizzie about doing this workshop. And as I mentioned, my coworker Marguerite is joining me. Marguerite, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Marguerite Apnop, and I'm a natural resource specialist here at the Thurston Conservation District. I specialize in farm planning with livestock owners or crop managers. I also am implementing the voluntary stewardship program here at the district, and we'll be talking about that program later on in the presentation.
Awesome. So Marguerite and I work here at Thurston CD, and the Conservation District has been working with local residents since 1947. We serve residents of Thurston County who reside upon indigenous lands of the Nisqually, Chehalis, and Squaxin people. We are one of 45 conservation districts in the state of Washington, and there are over 3,000 soil and water conservation districts nationally. If you are joining us from outside of Thurston County or outside of Washington State, it sounds like there's some of both on our call today, then we would really encourage you to get in touch with your local conservation district. And if you are unsure about that or looking for assistance, I'm very happy to help you with doing that. Conservation districts were formed in the 1930s as the local, place, and community-based response to natural resource concerns. Nationally, conservation districts provide incentive-based programs, education, and non-regulatory technical assistance that make it accessible and more affordable for private landowners to put good conservation practices into action on their property or in their home. All of our work is non-regulatory and voluntary at the Conservation District. And because districts are so locally oriented, we are able to build our programming and offerings really around the needs of our local community specifically. And as I mentioned, we'll discuss some of those programs and options at the end here. And we're actually just now launched a search for community members to join a citizens advisory committee as well. So we really work with our local community and try to offer things that we hear back are of interest and that folks are seeking out. So to get started in the meat of our presentation this evening, I'm going to hand it off to Suzanne first, and there'll be a little bit of transfer in between things here, so bear with us. I'm going to give you the mouse control now.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Suzanne Hoey-Lees. I am with NRCS down in the Chehalis office. I actually live in Thurston County and have been in a number of counties in Washington for, well over 25 years. But they've all been on the west side, so I'm partial to the rain. Anyway, that's who I am. I will give Lizzie a quick minute to introduce herself. This is a co-presentation for the two of us. Lizzie?
Hi, I'm Lizzie. I'm a soil scientist with NRCS here in Olympia. And that's all I have to say.
Okay, thanks, Lizzie. All right, I'm trying to see where the clicker is and it disappeared. Nora, can you advance the slide, please? Okay, so I'm going to do a big broad stroke of land issues, big dreams about what starts going through a lot of people's minds when they start saying, oh, I want to own a land. I've decided I want to farm. And it's just dirt, right? Dirt is dirt. Well, not exactly. So I'm going to share some stories, hopefully to help you avoid some heartbreaks. I am working with a number of landowners that I'm hearing more and more commonly the story. I bought this piece, I have all these dreams, but I can't make things grow on this piece of property. So then we start digging into it, and lo and behold, their dreams do not exactly align with the property that they purchased. So farmers, ranchers, forest owners, crop growers, they have very different needs than the average landowner. Most realtors, when they hear, oh, I'm looking for a piece of property, they don't consider all the needs of that person. A farmer's needs are very, very different than somebody who wants a residential cabin out in the woods. Livestock owner's needs are very different than a crop sheriff's needs. But the biggest investment is actually the land itself. You can fix the house relatively, within most budgets, but you cannot completely change the soil that your property sits on. It is the most expensive thing to alter. So here's some quick little stories to help get that going. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm literally working with a number of people that say, why can't I grow anything here? I moved from X, Y, and Z, and I could grow the same thing beautifully. It would just produce and flourish, and why not here? Well, unfortunately, there's a lot of considerations under the surface of the ground. In this picture, you can see some vegetation that clearly starts giving you clues that you probably have a high water table, or perhaps the whole place actually is a wetland. So these stories start going into, oh my gosh, you really need to reconsider what you've purchased. And how do we help mesh that? Because it's not so easy to fix these situations. So once you have a wetland parcel and you had dreams of having cattle or horses or whatever livestock, sheep, llamas, you name it. If it is truly a wetland, their hooves will rot. You will not have adequate forage to support them. We can help you by giving them hardened paddocks in order to stand out of the mud, because if you leave them in a wetland, depending on what size they are, you may have livestock up to their knees in mud 3/4 of the time of the year, until, if it's a seasonal wetland, you may only have 2 months of dry. So you will also be buying hay instead of grazing 3/4 of the year. So that's a huge consideration. If you're seeing sedges and rushes, dig deeper into why is this property so wet. If you're on the edge of a wetland complex, or if you're dead center, it's going to impact things differently. Hopefully you're outside of it, but prime farmland is getting harder and harder to acquire, and that those pieces that are prime farmland are very expensive. If cost is the leading aspect for your hunt, you may want to dig into the reasons why it is cheaper. So I'll let Lizzie dig into those actual soil things. Next slide, please. So I was out at a site the other day, very similar to what I just described. She wanted to have her cattle and her horses out on this beautiful grass pasture. She couldn't understand why she got the property so cheap. These big dreams, and lo and behold, the entire place that she wanted to use and have this boarding stable is literally a wetland. It is, you walk out there and you start sinking, and you can see right above my toe how deep the local deer hoof prints are. They're sinking in as well. So it kind of gives you an idea as to what's happening. So not only is it a wetland, it is on the National Wetland Inventory. So it's very regulated by not only federal, but state and local county regulations. So be it something to consider. There are very strict regulations with what you can do with an identified wetland. Next slide, please. So another landowner that I'm working with just moved into the area, just built a brand new house on it, says, I don't understand why I can't grow the grass that I want to grow for livestock. It's like, oh, my neighbors, they have beautiful grass and cattle, and I've got standing water ponds in my field. Why is there a difference? The neighbor's property has old drain tiles in it. They're literally in the middle of a big wetland complex. Congress in '85 changed the laws that you cannot drain a wetland any longer, and NRCS cannot help with any of that drainage. So that has also prompted state legislation and local counties to say you can no longer drain these things without serious repercussions. If you drain a wetland, you do make yourself automatically ineligible for any NRCS financial assistance. Federal dollars cannot go to a property that has been drained after '85. So this particular site is very limited on what they're going to be able to do. It's a beautiful site, it's a beautiful property. It's just not aligning with what they had dreamed. So now we're discussing how do we readjust the dreams to the reality of what this property can support. So one of the very huge telltale signs is if you've got ponded water and it is June or July, please look into the soils, dig into it a little deeper, consider whether or not it's going to mesh with your dreams. Next slide, please. And then I have the other aspect of, what do you mean I've got a wetland in my forest? There are forested wetlands. They all have the same characteristics as open water wetlands, but they're literally in the forest. Skunk cabbage is present, reeds are present, rushes are present. Trees do not perform extremely well in these areas, but it is a fantastic way of filtering water. These typically show up if there's a spring or a weep or a seep coming through a hillside or at the toe of a hillside. That's predominantly where you'll see these. I think this is the last slide, but one more.
Yeah, I think this starts Lizzie's slides.
Okay, so to reiterate, there's a bunch of key factors to start looking for. You know, how wet is it? How soggy is it? Is it covered with reed canary grass? Get to know those key plants: reed canary grass, spirea, dead giveaways, skunk cabbage, reeds, such as look around. Don't fall in love with the house. If you want to farm, if you want to have livestock, start looking at the land first. I'll just share a quick story. I drove my husband crazy for the first several years when we were looking for a property. And this last piece that we bought, he would fall in love with the property, the location, and I'd start digging into it and say, no, we're not getting that. And the answer would always come down to, well, why not? I said, because it's not going to support what we want to do. So our poor realtor, bless his heart, must have shown us 40 properties. And out of those 40, only 3 were potentially acceptable to my criteria. Because the first thing I would do after my husband would fall in love with this place was I would start researching the soils and researching the climate and looking at all the factors that I can't change but are going to impact my farming or livestock operations. It took us 2.5 years. We drove our realtor nuts. But I am so thankful that we did the upfront research, and I don't regret it. I don't have the issues that I knew would be on some of the other properties. So please do your due diligence, research the property. Yes, a lot of these lands that I thought I wanted did go off the market, but in the long run, I'm happier with the piece that we have. So please look into all the factors that you cannot change before you purchase what you think is your dream property. Thank you.
All right,
Lizzie?
Lizzie, would you like me to change your slides or would you like to?
I will try to do it.
Okay, I will give you mouse control.
Okay. Okay, I'm not sure if it's working, but I'll give it a minute while I talk. So yeah, thank you, Suzanne. That was a really great introduction to what I'm going to talk about. When Suzanne and I got the idea to do this presentation a few months back, I asked her what the main types of issue that her customers face when they're buying property, and she told me these three that I've listed on the slide. Problems with low fertility and poor soil health, soil compaction, and drainage issues. And I've listed those in order of how hard they are to deal with. So I'm going to tell you about all of those, and I'm also going to talk about how you can do research on them online and some tricks that you can use when you're out on site to assess those issues as well. Okay, it worked. So the first category of issue that Suzanne brought to my attention was poor fertility and poor soil health. So fertility, it's a straightforward thing. It's when your soil isn't able to supply the nutrients that your plants need to grow. And that could be because they've been depleted. I have heard about a lot of prior landowners who have just continually hayed or harvested off of a piece of land without replenishing the nutrients. You could have a soil that's just naturally low in nutrients. It could be very sandy. Sandy soils can hold less. They can also hold less water. And nutrients and organic matter tend to go hand in hand because organic matter is a reservoir for nutrients. As it decomposes over time, more nutrients become available to plants. And again, it could be depleted by farming practices if you don't replenish it, or it could be naturally low. If you have a soil that used to be under forest cover, forest soils are just lower in organic matter than grassland soils. So you might need to add more organic matter for the soil to be fertile. One issue that's becoming more and more apparent to soil scientists lately is the importance of diverse soil life and soil ecology. It's not just, we don't just see the soil as a machine anymore where you put in nutrients and then you take plants out. It's an ecosystem that needs lots of diverse, flourishing bugs to be productive. So if someone has applied a lot of harsh chemicals over a long period of time, if they have tilled really intensively, then your earthworms, your beneficial bacteria and fungi, all those things are going to be, they won't be as strong. And therefore you won't get as good nutrient cycling. Nothing's going to be breaking down that organic matter and making its nutrients available to your plants anymore. And then the last issue within soil health is soil physical properties. So if someone has really abused the soil, if they have just tilled it intensively, then they might have destroyed the soil structure. And what I mean by that is soil particles naturally are stuck together in these aggregates. They're just little balls of soil. You can see it a little bit in that picture on the lower right there. Soil, if it's healthy, it should look kind of like chocolate cake. And between those aggregates should be air spaces. And that is really important for aerating roots, for roots to grow, and for water holding. So yes, that will be really damaged if someone prior to you buying the land, has abused the soil. You might also see crusting, like you can see in the upper right. And that is when someone has tilled the soil when it's too wet usually, and it just forms a solid crust on top and the water can't get in anymore. And that's a big problem. So these are issues, but I would say that they are pretty reversible. You can add nutrients, you can add organic matter, you can stop using really intensive practices that destroy the soil life and the structure. It just might take a few years. But if you don't have to do that, then you're in a better position to start with. So here are some ways that you can recognize these things when you're in the field. One really simple thing that you can do that will tell you a good amount of information about your soil is texturing it. and you're figuring out how much sand, silt, and clay is in your soil. And that won't tell you how much nitrogen or potassium is in your soil, but it'll tell you its potential to hold it. So if you feel the soil and you say, oh, this is really sandy, I know that its baseline of nutrients is lower. Whereas if it's got a loamier or clayier texture, then it can hold more nutrients and more water. And there are YouTube videos about how to do this. We're also attaching a texturing guide with the materials that we're handing out at the end if you want to learn how to do this. Another thing that you can do pretty quickly if you're on site is just digging a little hole and taking some soil in your hand and looking at the structure. Can you discern individual aggregates and air spaces in between them? If you bounce the soil in your hand a little bit, does it fall apart just slightly? You don't want it to be too hard, but you don't want it to just turn into dust either. Okay, waiting for the slide. There it is. Another thing that I think people just instinctively know a lot of the time is you want your soil to be dark. That means it has good organic matter in it. You can also look for signs of life. So when you have your little hole open, you can look for insects, lots of roots. Worms are a really good thing. And you can actually smell the soil. If it has that classic rich, earthy smell, that's a good thing. That is called geosmin, and it's a compound that's produced by beneficial bacteria that are only present when the soil ecosystem is in a pretty good state. If the soil doesn't smell like anything, or if it smells sour, this isn't definitive, but you could make the assumption like, oh, this isn't as robust of an ecosystem. And finally, you can use Web Soil Survey to look at things like organic matter. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, Web Soil Survey is the USDA's repository of soil maps. And it has lots of properties, things like organic matter, water tables, lots and lots of information, which I will show you later on in my presentation. With something like organic matter that changes with management, you should take the map with a grain of salt because it's a snapshot in time. But I think that it's a useful place to start because, kind of like texturing, it shows you maybe more of the potential for what the organic matter could be. The next issue that Suzanne told me about was compaction. And that is just when you squish your soil. When you are running heavy machinery or livestock over soil that doesn't have the bearing strength to stand up to it, the airspace in between those aggregates is going to get squished. And what that means is you have less air for your roots to breathe, your roots can't penetrate through the soil as easily, your water can't get into the soil as easily, and you're going to get ponding and runoff at the surface. And I want to draw your attention to my crummy little drawing. The middle picture is a compacted soil, and that's a stunted plant there. And a telltale sign is that in addition to being stunted, the roots are growing laterally just below the surface. So look out for that. So other things that you can look out for. If soil has been compacted, its structure will go from those nice cakey aggregates to something that is platy. So you can see on the lower left here, there's a chunk of soil that has little horizontal plates. And you can imagine how it might be hard for water to go down through those or for roots to do the same. Soil that gets compacted also can form a massive structure. So it just gets squished into one giant blob. And that's not good either. You can get crusting, and you'll see signs of ponding. And even if you don't see standing water, like Suzanne was talking about, you might see clues that there once was standing water. things like a mat of green algae on the surface or stunted plants. One trick that you can use is you can buy one of those little plot flags. I've got a drawing on the right here. These things cost 10 cents at the hardware store. You can go to your site, you can find a spot where you think you might want to grow something, stick it in, make a mental note of how hard it was to get it into the soil, and then go to a different spot that seems like it's on the same landscape position. So if you're on a terrace, on the same terrace. If you're at the top of the hill, see if you can be on the same hilltop. But you want to choose a spot that looks less disturbed, maybe something that's under tree cover. So then you stick your flag in there and you compare, and if it's significantly easier in the undisturbed spot, then that's a clue that you might have some real compaction that you're dealing with on your site. And lastly, you can go to Web Soil Survey for this, and you can look up susceptibility to compaction. I can show you where that is during the demo. And that is a pretty reliable interpretation because it doesn't really change over time. So compaction, unlike fertility, is a lot harder to deal with. Some people think that you could just till the soil to get rid of it, but that will just push the layer of compacted soil deeper. You could do deep ripping, but that's a big deal. It's an ordeal. You need special equipment. It's expensive. Some people will plant tillage radishes or grasses with aggressive roots. I'm not sure how well that works. I think it takes a long time. So if you can avoid getting a compacted pasture or just piece of land, then it's really ideal. And my third and final area of issues is drainage. I'm glad that Suzanne, you spent so much time on this on your part, because this is probably the biggest thing that people face in Western Washington. We've got a wet climate and we've got soils and geology that like to hold water up near the surface. So this is something that everybody needs to look out for. So it's a problem because waterlogged soil will inhibit root growth. Plants generally don't like to have wet feet. If you want to put in a septic drain field, you're going to need a very expensive system, because if you have an ordinary flat field, your effluent is going to be touching the water table, and that's very nasty. If you want to run livestock or vehicles, you're going to get serious compaction issues, and your livestock, its health might suffer. And it's an issue if you want to build a home and put in a basement, because it's going to flood. I'll just have a brief story. I just bought a house, and I'm a soil scientist. I look at Web Soil Survey all the time. I looked at suitability for basements of my house because it has a basement, and it said that it was low. And I was in denial. I really wanted the house. So I was like, oh, it's probably fine. How bad could it be? And here I am with a multi-tens of thousands of dollars problem on my hands. So don't be like me. Listen to the Web Soil Survey. Yes. So yeah, perched water tables, high water tables. Okay. Oh, and we have moved ahead. So you have lots of resources at your disposal if you're trying to figure out if you've got soil moisture problems. The first place to look is probably online. Your county assessor webpage has maps of wetlands and wetland review areas. It doesn't have literally every wetland that's out there, because there are just thousands of them that no one knows about yet. And you might need to have a delineation. And I would recommend contacting your county planning staff to learn more about when that's necessary, because I'm not the legal expert on that. but this is a great place to start. You can also go to, surprise, Web Soil Survey. It's got lots of information about water. It's referred to as water features in Web Soil Survey, and you can look at depth to water table, which is what I have on this map on the at what months of the year a soil might be ponded, where the water table is going to be during those months, flooding. Okay. There it is. So those are good resources, but it's important to go out on site and look too, because they're not going to tell you everything. So areas with poor drainage often have certain soil features, plants, and hydrology. These are the three factors that go into legally defining a wetland, and that's not what I'm teaching you how to do. I just want to tell you some basic signs that you can look for in the field. So one surefire sign that you have a wetland issue or just a wet soil issue is if your soil looks like this. When soils are saturated for more than a few weeks, they develop what we in the business call redoxomorphic features. And that is the result of the movement of iron when the soil gets really wet, and it forms a light gray or gray and orange pattern. And it's typically near the surface if the soil is really wet. And that's what it looks like on the left here. That's a classic hydric soil. And you can just dig a little hole and look for that pattern. It might not be that obvious in cases like the right image. Sometimes soils are so wet that organic matter doesn't decompose very fast, and it builds up to form a thick, dark surface. And it will conceal those redox features, and you won't see them until you get about a foot or 16 inches down. So if you're really serious, then you could bring a probe or an auger, and then you could get a little deeper to look for those signs. But I think most of the time it's going to look more like the soil on the left. Okay, another thing is the hydrology. So that's just the way water moves through the landscape. If you have signs of saturation, it's a good indication that it's wet soil, but you can also spot something like that from aerial imagery, like Google Earth. I've got an image in the upper right here. I know it's kind of blurry, but you might be able to see that in the top right corner, it's a light green color, and that's just the normal grass color. And then it gets really like a deeper, brighter green, and then a sort of a darkish brownish color. And that darker spot with the bright green is most likely a very wet spot. So you can use Google Earth or Google Maps to your advantage. You can look for signs of flooding when you're on site, and that might be if sticks and grass are piled up against the base of the trees because the water's brought them there. It might be if grass is all laying down in the same direction, or if you have a bunch of fir needles that are pointing in the same direction because the water flow has pointed them that way. And you'll want to look for signs of ponding. So standing water, great sign. If you don't see standing water, but you see that mat of algae, like I mentioned before, if you see stunted plants, those are good signs of ponding. But what might be more obvious is where you are on the landscape. So if you're in a concave position, like this drawing on the lower left, or if you're at the bottom of the hill, there's a fly in my hair, sorry, then that is where water is going to collect, and it's likelier that you're going to have a wet soil. Okay, and then the most apparent sign, because it's above ground, is often the plants. So, sedges, rushes, skunk cabbage, spirea, salmonberry, There are lots and lots of wetland plants. Buttercup, that's one that likes to be wet too. So I'm going to show you a couple pictures. In the lower right here is some skunk cabbage. That is like the classic wet plant. You don't see it anywhere but places that are really, really wet. Here's some more. Here is salmonberry on the left. That likes to be not always wet, but often you'll find it in wet zones. Horsetail, spirea, and sedge is a very wet plant. So there are so many of these plants, and there are a lot of resources online. I would recommend the Department of Transportation wetland plants list, the Washington DOT specifically. It's not the most user-friendly in that it's got a bunch of acronyms and it doesn't have pictures, but it's very exhaustive. So the plants that are labeled OBL are always wet. And the plants that are labeled FACW are often wet, occasionally dry. There are other plants lists. I discovered the King County plants list while I was making this presentation, and I found that one had really good pictures, and it had some limited site information like soil moisture. So I'll just end this part by reiterating what Suzanne was saying. There are some things you can change. You really can't change how wet a soil is at this point. So just, do as much research as you can. And now I am going to do a brief web soil survey demo. So can I share my screen?
Yeah, so hang on a second here and I will help you out.
Okay.
All right, Lizzie, you should be the presenter now, so go ahead and share your screen.
Okay. Okay. So the easiest way to get to web soil survey is just Googling web soil survey. It'll be the first link. And get in by clicking the big green button. And it should take you to this page, a map of the US. So if I'm not working with the lag, if I'm going too far ahead, then Nora, please let me know. But what you do, oh, go ahead.
So maybe give it just a second here.
Oh, okay. Oh, shoot. I'll turn off my camera.
It doesn't look like it's changing, which I'm not sure if it will catch up to you or if you want to try again, but I know we could also go back and go through the slides that.
Oh, you know what? This thing opens up a new tab. I am going to share again.
There you go.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Perfect. That looks great. If anyone is trying to make this screen bigger, also you can minimize everyone's little icons at the top, and there is also a zoom in, zoom out feature on the right-hand side of the screen that individuals can each do on them for themselves.
Cool. So once you find yourself at this map, there are these tools in the upper left of the map: zoom in, zoom out, and pan. And that's how you will navigate to where you want to go. Okay, so I've just zoomed into a random area, and I'm going to pan a little bit. Once you're looking at what you want to look at, there are these two buttons at the right side of the toolbar that say AOI. So I'm going to click on this one on the right that kind of looks like a triangle, and that's the one that lets you draw a polygon. Okay, and you double click to finish the shape, and you have your area of interest, and that's what's in the blue stripes. So the first thing that I generally do is there's this row of tabs up here towards the top. And to the right of AOI is soil map. And I like to get a sense of what I'm looking at. And you've got these lines, and you've got numbers within each line, or within each shape, and those correspond with map units. So a map unit is a soil type or a collection of soil types that appear across the landscape on similar landscape positions. So I'm going to click on Prather. You get this window, the map unit description, that pops up, and it's got some information about the map unit itself, and about the soil type, Prather, that lives inside that map unit. So we've got some elevation information, some climate information. Then the map unit composition is Prather and similar soils, 90%, and then 7% minor components, just little miscellaneous pockets of different soil types. I don't know what the other 3% is in this case, but it's an old map. I think they did things differently back then. So then you can look at the component, which is another word for soil type. You can see that it hangs out on terraces, it's formed in glacial drift. We've got a very basic soil profile with just the textures. And then we have some important limitations, like if there's bedrock, how deep is that? If there's a drainage issue, how deep is that? It's moderately well drained in this case. Flooding, ponding, available water capacity, and here are the minor components. And if you want more information about what those are, you could Google Lacamas soil series or Scammon soil series, and then you'll get a description. So this can be useful if you want to go out and just see what's mapped and see if the mapping is correct. You probably wouldn't want to do that at this stage, but if you did, then you could dig a hole and you could say, oh, wow, it's not moderately well drained. They must have mapped it wrong, which occasionally happens. All right, so what might be more useful for you at this stage is the Soil Data Explorer. So that's up in that top row of tabs to the right of Soil Map. And you'll see that a second row of tabs has appeared below that other one. And there's Intro to Soils, which is just a lot of general info about soils. suitabilities and limitations for use, which is how these different soil types are rated for different uses. Soil properties and qualities, which is more fundamental measurable properties like pH and organic matter and a few other things. And then we don't have ecological sites available here, but we have soil reports, which is kind of a combination of those other two, except it doesn't give you a map like the other two do, but it does give you a table with multiple properties and suitabilities and things listed. So I'm just going to show you one or two examples. And then I think I will ask you to put something in the chat if you so desire that you would like me to look up. And if it's something that I can find, then I'll show you where you can find it. So let's start with land management. Let's see. Soil compaction resistance. So now you get this box here. You can view description, which tells you just what soil compaction resistance means and what units are used. And you'll want to click View Rating. Okay, and now you have a map. So to find out what the red and yellow mean, in the top left of this map, there is a little tab that says Legend. So you can click that, and you'll see that the red is low resistance, and then the yellow is moderate resistance. And then if you scroll down, oh, and I can tell you right now, 118 is Lacamas, which is a wet soil, and that's probably why it's low resistance. But you can scroll down, and you get this table with all this information. So Lacamas, low resistance. And then here's the reasons. It's got a lot of clay, wetness. I don't know why some of these are repeated. Okay, and then the same thing for these other map units. So let's say you were really excited about this information that you got here and you want to take it with you into the field. If you go up to the upper right, click Add to Shopping Cart, and just click OK. It's going to save it for you. You don't have to pay for anything. Okay. So that was that. I'm going to show you one more. Let's go to soil. Well, no, let's go to soil reports. Water features is going to be very useful. Okay, and you just click View Soil Report. These can take a while to load because they have more information in them. Oh, there it goes. So for every soil type or component, in every map unit, there is some information. So most likely months for water features to be apparent are January through April for Lacamas. The water table, it'll be in this range from here to here. It's a perched water table. And then if there were ponding, this is where the information on that would be. And the same goes for flooding. Okay, I'm gonna add that to our pretend shopping cart. Okay, and you can see that there is a lot of information here. You know, each one of these that you open just shows you even more. So I'm not going to be able to show you everything, but you can poke around and see what is useful to you. But I do invite you now to say what you're interested in looking up, if anything.
Hi, I'm wondering, is there a way to like search for an address in this? So you could say, okay, I'm looking for the property, here's the address or a road name or something? Or do you just have,
Yeah, I believe there is. I'm going to double check.
Yes, there is. So,
Okay.
sorry, I'm jumping in on top of you, Lizzie, but the area of interest, you can type in an actual address. You can do township range section. So it depends. If you go to right below the quick navigation bar, a little lower than where you are, Lizzie, there's address. So you would just type it in with commas between the street address and the city, and it'll act just like Google Earth does.
Thank you, Suzanne. I didn't know that.
Yep. It's incredibly helpful when I'm trying to find somebody's site that they said, I need help with this.
Cool. Okay, well, if nobody has any burning questions, I'm going to quit sharing my screen. And I think it's the next slide. I just have a list of things that people have found useful in the past. Oh, it's 37, I think.
Okay. This one?
Yes. Yeah, so I'm not going to read each and every one of these to you, but you can see that under suitabilities and limitations, you've got things like fencing, rutting, range production, basements. Under soil properties and qualities, you've got more basic physical properties like available water capacity, saturated hydraulic conductivity, which is how fast water moves through the soil. And there are soil reports that can tell you about hydric soils, forage suitability groups, which has to do with how good the land is for growing, you know, different types of pasture, and yeah, and things about water. There's a lot there. So one final word about web soil survey. Oh shoot. Okay, so maybe I've given you control back, but I would like to go to the next slide. Okay, sorry about that. The maps are not 100% accurate. They're pretty accurate, but you need to take them with a grain of salt, and often you'll want to verify for yourself that what is mapped there is what's actually there. You'll also just want to keep in mind that there are some soil properties that change with management. So what is on Web Soil Survey is not necessarily what you're going to find with things like organic matter. So use it as a starting point, and then use your field skills to try and verify what you can. And oh yeah, and you can always call a soil scientist if you would like help.
That's a really great transition because we're going to hand it over to Marguerite, who is going to talk about some of the specific programs from the Conservation District and kinds of assistance that are available from the district.
Awesome. And I'm going to actually have you change my slides, Nora, if you don't mind.
That's all good.
The next one. So as we shared at the beginning of this evening, the Thurston Conservation District is a non-regulatory agency that works with residents to manage and conserve natural resources, usually on private lands. This can be a great tool that's available to new and existing landowners alike. The bread and butter of this work is doing the one-on-one assistance with folks. This can be anything from answering questions and connecting you with resources to site visits where we look at things together to full-blown planting and farm management plans. And what we want you to take away from this evening is that there are resources and programs available to assist you in working with your new farmland. We have technical staff who specialize in assisting farm properties and staff who specialize in habitat specific questions. Sometimes these staff work together with one landowner to help find solutions and offer ideas. Go ahead and move it on over. So one program I want to touch on tonight is the Voluntary Stewardship Program, which came about via legislation in 2011 that is aimed at providing an alternative to regulation for management of critical areas where they overlap with agricultural activities. Thurston County was among one of the first counties in the state to begin the development of VSP through working with a group of citizens, staff from Thurston County, and the Thurston Conservation District. These entities collaborated together to roll out this program for the community. And unfortunately, prior to 2011, the main tool for counties to ensure protection of critical areas on agricultural land was regulation. This program is a great example of how conservation districts work with agricultural producers to meet their production goals while also considering specific and important natural resources. VSP is an excellent entry point into working with the district if you haven't in the past. And the program works with residents who are practicing agriculture, no matter the scale, and who also have critical areas on their property. Through the program, our staff works directly with you to develop what's called an individual stewardship plan. So next slide, please. So what are critical areas? I'm going to touch on the 5 different critical areas tonight that Thurston County recognizes. The first being fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas. And these are locations where species and/or types of habitat are considered as priorities for conservation and management. Also wetlands, which was definitely something talked about a lot tonight. And these are areas that are inundated by surface and/or groundwater at a frequency sufficient to support animal/plant life that is adapted to those saturated soil conditions. There's also frequently flooded areas, and these are lands in the floodplain that are subject to at least 1% or greater chance of flooding in any given year, or within areas subject to flooding due to high groundwater. These areas include, but are not limited to, streams, rivers, lakes, coastal areas, wetlands, and areas where high groundwater forms pond on the ground surface. Geological hazardous areas are areas that are susceptible to erosion, sliding, earthquakes, and other geological events. Something that we really touch on a lot is anything that's at a moderate to high risk for liquefaction, lahars, or landslides. And lastly, critical aquifer recharge areas, also known as CARAs, are areas where water infiltrates into aquifers that are used for drinking water. These have unique soil properties and underlying geology that support water infiltration and storage. CARAs are vulnerable to groundwater contamination if pollutants from the surface reach the aquifer. CARAs in Thurston County are categorized as types 1, 2, and 3, 1 being the most critical and 3 being the least vulnerable. Next slide, please. So Thurston County has these fact sheets that they have on their website, and we've also put these 5 different fact sheets in the resource folder that you'll be given at the end of the evening. They cover basic information on each of these critical areas, important things to know about each of those critical areas, and also some examples of what they are. Next slide. So when someone works with the district to develop their individual stewardship plan, it will include maps of where any mapped critical areas are located on the property. And the reason why I put quotations around the word mapped is because these critical areas can be designated as something and then might require further investigation to determine if that designation is valid for that location. So each critical area will be displayed on its own map with a written inventory on what is on the property, and then some best management practices will be suggested that can be implemented on the property to improve farming efficiencies while protecting critical areas. And these maps are specifically tailored to the property, and we can also supply folks with soil maps, LiDAR maps, and other types of maps if they're needed to achieve your landowner goals. Next slide, please. All right, so if you're like in property hunting mode, you can look up these critical areas yourself, and there's a handful of interactive maps available to the public. For geological hazardous areas, there are some great maps on DNR's website. That's the Washington Geologic Information Portal, and that has landslides and lahar information along with a bunch of other stuff. The liquefaction map is a tad difficult to navigate, so there is a static map in the resources folder that you can kind of zoom in and check and see if a certain area is determined to be low or high risk for liquefaction. And the area in these still shots is an overview of Scatter Creek Wildlife Recreational Area, and there is no lahars or landslides mapped in this location. And the map on the right side is the PHS map, and this map is brought to you by the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and it'll help you determine if there's any fish or wildlife habitat conservation areas on this site. The mapping system has changed in the last year and might be a little different to navigate, but still provides a lot of good information. It can include areas where pocket gophers have been identified, if endangered plant life has been documented on that site, and also cover possible occurrences of aquatic life within water bodies such as Oregon spotted frog. This area on Scatter Creek is prime habitat for creatures like tailored checkered spot, pocket gophers, cutthroat, coho, and Townsend big-eared bat. What's really wonderful about this tool is you can select a single parcel or make a polygon to capture the entire area, then use this generate report button on the site, and it will create a document for you with that mapped area and a description of all the priority habitat and species in that location. And It's not pictured here on the slide, but if you're interested to see, if there's mapped wetlands, frequently flooded, gopher soils, and or CARAs on a site in Thurston County Geodata Map has those variables that you can assess using one mapping system. It's a nifty way to really scope out farmland without having to physically be there. And if you can check it out beforehand, you will be more prepared to look for possible areas of concern when you're viewing a property. Next slide, please. So what is agricultural activity? It includes the production of livestock, food, fuel, fiber, floral products, also fallow ground in rotation, hay production, gardening, beekeeping, Christmas trees, land use for maintenance of agricultural equipment, pretty much the whole farming gamut. There's no profit threshold or size scale to participate. I've dealt with landowners who have, large scale dairy, goat dairies, bovine dairies, to someone that has like 5 raised beds in their backyard and also, some wetlands to the side that they wanted to know how to navigate that. So just anything in between, we're more than happy to help you with some technical assistance. Last slide, or next slide. So why participate in VSP? This program gives landowners a greater understanding of critical areas on site and how to work with them instead of working against them. It's also really flexible. It allows for the agricultural community to manage these resources in a way that achieves their goals and objectives. It helps protect farmland from violation by managing those resource concerns on site. And participation in VSP can introduce landowners to funding opportunity or cost share programs. It adds to the image of agricultural lands being a good source of excellent stewardship to these natural resources. And lastly, the success in the voluntary stewardship program supports an incentive-based voluntary approach to land stewardship for all Thurston County residents. And Nora, if we have time, I can also do just kind of a run through of those different mapping systems if time allows.
Yeah, I think we've got time.
All right. Well, if I can share my screen.
Yeah, hang on just a second here.
Go ahead and let me know when you can see what's on there.
Yeah, it looks good.
Okay, so I'm just going to continue with using Scatter Creek as an example. This is DNR's mapping portal that they have. And so you, just like Web Soil Survey, you can type in a location here and it'll zoom to it, or you can use these different indicators on the side to either scroll in or scroll out, and then just use your mouse to kind of pan around until you're in the location that you're interested in looking at. And then there's this table of contents here on the side. You can search a specific one if you're interested, or for me, I know that I want to look up landslides, and then you just highlight that area. And you can see it kind of was hashed before, and then when you unselected it, it dehashed. And that's just, you can bring this down and it'll say, what all of those different indicators mean. So for this site in particular, there isn't any landslide issues, and then there's no lahar. The only area in Thurston County that you would be concerned of a lahar is the Nisqually area. So you can see here indicated by all the orange that it's kind of a little bit of a dicey area to invest infrastructure in, but there's plenty of things there, and who knows if or when that would ever be an issue. So that's the DNR one. Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife has their PHS map. And the same thing, I've just zoomed into the Scatter Creek Reserve area. And what I like about this map, I can see if I can move. Oop, no, don't want to leave the meeting, sorry. I can't, there we go. If you go to the top right corner, there's this little spyglass here. You can click that, and that's where you can select a point, draw a polygon, or select a parcel. So for me, I'm going to select this entire parcel, and then it'll come up with this list here of everything that's documented on the site. So a lot of these big circles here are probably pocket gophers, or they'll have certain plants. And then also, you know, there's Scatter Creek running through the top portion here. So it'll highlight when you roll over Chinook, it kind of highlights Scatter Creek, showing that that's where that specific species is either located or there's a possibility of an occurrence. And then it also has prairie. So that's a habitat that we want to try to conserve here in Thurston County. And then another one I wanted to talk about is the Martyrin skipper or the Taylor's checker spot. A lot of those type of animals, they'll put on more of a township level. Sorry if I'm making anyone sick scrolling so fast, but you see how it highlights this whole township to the right? And then it does the same thing with bats, because those type of critters and creatures, they move throughout their landscape. So they don't pinpoint them necessarily in one spot. They just, you know, say that they can be found within this area. And so that's, and that generate report button is right at the top. And so you would just click that button here. It'll open up the report for you, and then you can print it or save it and keep it for records. So then you kind of know, you know, okay, this certain type of plant is here, or one animal of concern in Thurston County is the pocket gopher, and it'll show you its status on a federal level and a state level, along with a bunch of other great information. So I really like this mapping tool. It's pretty comprehensive. And then lastly, I'm just going to do a quick share of the Thurston County geodata map. And so the same area here, the Scatter Creek Reserve, and let's type in wetland, because that's one that, you know, we care about quite a bit. It's a one, if you have a lot of wetland on an area, it's difficult to build infrastructure on. And so you see the wetland is kind of up here along the top towards Scatter Creek. And then you can also put a wetland review area. And this is just, I like to think of it as a buffer. It kind of just puts out a dash beyond what's mapped as a wetland. So just kind of, if you have that on your property, just know that that's going to be most likely an inundated area, and you want to think about building outside of that area, or having your livestock or crops outside of that area if possible. And then frequently flooded is something, it won't be called frequently flooded, so you can just type in flood. And then there's a bunch of different ones that you can look up. I usually use the flood zones from FEMA. That will show you purple is 100-year flood or 1%. And then the orange, where there's just kind of a little bit along here, is the 500-year flood, or there's a 0.2% chance of flood. And so then you also have gopher soils. And these are just soils that are provide good habitat to the pocket gopher. And so if you have gopher type soils on your property, you just want to keep an eye out and make sure that you're protecting that that resource and those animals. So the dark brown is more preferred, the light brown is less preferred, and then there's areas where there's just no preference given to that type of soil. Oh, the last critical area I talked about this evening is the critical aquifer recharge areas. And so we'll click that one, and it'll just it follows the same lines that Lizzie talked about earlier with the soils map. So there's all these different lines, but it associates a number or a rating. So you have a lot of Care 1. So those are your most critical aquifer recharge soils. They're going to be very permeable. And then you have 2s, and then there's not any 3 here on the map, but there probably is. Yep, right in here. There's a type 3 soil, and then there's some that just don't have a rating at all. And this map is really great because not only does it have all of your critical areas, but there's just a bunch of other, things that you might want to think about before buying a home, like what type of crime is in the area, if what city you're in, if you're in the county, or if you're in the city, if you're in the urban growth area, just kind of whatever type of characteristics you're looking for in buying farmland. This is a really one-stop shop that you can see a lot about a property without going out there. But then if you wanted to look more details into the animal and habitat or the geological information, you can go to DNR or PHS. That is all the maps that I use a lot when I'm helping landowners through technical assistance or helping them through their agricultural goals.
I'll say I'm a big fan of geodata linking to county assessor data also, so you can really easily look up the owner history and other information of tax history and stuff about properties also. Okay, so thank you, Marguerite and Lizzie and Suzanne. This has been a wealth of information this evening. I'm going to go over just a few of the resources that we have for y'all after the fact tonight. The first that I mentioned at the beginning is this Google Drive resource folder. I'm going to put a link to that in the chat right now. So you can access that to find some handouts, some of the programs and things that Marguerite and Lizzie and Suzanne talked about are available in there, so you can find those there. As Marguerite mentioned at the beginning of her portion, kind of the bread and butter of what the Conservation District does is one-on-one technical assistance, whether that's just, I've got a question and I'm looking for help in brainstorming resources, or I'm looking for a site visit on this new property that I'm on. That's what conservation districts do across the board, is that kind of one-on-one technical assistance. So if that's something that becomes interesting to you, reach out and we'll put in what we call a request for assistance and get you on the list for that. Conservation planning and farm planning and things like that are often or sometimes an outcome of those one-on-one moments with folks. And so if a more hands-on plan becomes something that you're looking for, then that is definitely an option as well. As Marguerite mentioned, VSP, you create an individual stewardship plan through that, which is sort of like a farm plan light and can sometimes work really nicely hand in hand with a farm plan or be a great way of starting your relationship with the conservation district. We have a soil health program at Thurston Conservation District, which is comprised of our soil and nutrient testing services. We help get your soil samples or nutrient samples out to a lab and then offer an interpretation service of those. And also through our soil health program, we rent out a number of spreaders. So we've got some manure spreaders, spin spreader, and drop spreader that we also assist with nutrient application through that program. We also rent other equipment through our equipment rental program, kind of differentiate that from the soil health program. We rent out poultry processing units, as well as things like weed wrenches, a broadcast seeder, and some other hand tools. And we have a wealth of information that is available to you. So this workshop is being recorded. We've done a bunch of online workshops in the last year, obviously. And because of that, we have a whole bunch of really awesome recordings of workshops that are continuously accessible to you on our website. I'll put a link to that in the chat in a moment as well. But there's some really fun ones on there that are on really specific nitty-gritty things. We've got some pasture management part 1 and part 2 that get pretty deep into there. Some really great ones on manure management if you're raising livestock. Some really fun ones that we did with Thurston County Environmental Health around weed control, winter gardening, some other things that are kind of geared towards home gardeners as well. So definitely encourage you to check those out if you would like. We have a couple of other workshops coming up. On May 11th, we're doing a workshop on building backyard habitat at your home. That's in partnership with the Timberland Regional Library. And we're also doing a workshop with Thurston County Noxious Weeds on May 20th that is really looking at noxious weeds, how to identify them, the noxious weeds that are detrimental to livestock, and then safe ways of removing those that don't impair things like water quality and soil health also. If you have a workshop topic that you would really like us to cover in the future, please feel free to send that to me directly. I'm the one who emailed you the link for this workshop. You're welcome to just reply back to that and say, hey, I would love a workshop on this. And I will keep that in my master list. And that is often how I try to pick the workshops that we do, because I would way rather put on something that y'all are interested in coming to. So I will put up some links in the chat right now that will have links to those previous workshops, how you can register for these current workshops, the soil health program and the equipment rental program. At this time, we are open for questions. We have a nice small group this evening, so if you have a question, you're welcome to throw that in the chat, or you are also welcome to unmute yourself, and we have got some good time to do questions. And if you're ready to go, that is also just fine.
Yeah, this is Ken Zarker. I wanted to, I don't remember if it was Susan or talked about just the 2-year project to find property in the region here, and given all the economic pressures on land currently, are there maybe certain realtors that do specialize in this type of thing, or is it just kind of a hunt and search and hope for the best?
Thanks for the question. This is Suzanne. There are a few realtors that have in the past offered their services specifically to farmers and ranchers. I don't know if they're still in the area. Me being a federal employee, I can't make recommendations for any party. So you may want to start your search for any listings that specialize in farmers. It's been a while since I've been on the market, so unfortunately, I don't think anybody that I was using is still in the practice at the moment, but he said I drove him literally insane. So, but he did learn. He learned that a farmer is looking for something that the typical resident isn't. And unfortunately, most realtors are focused on the house. Once he finally learned I was focused on the land and what the land could do, he started offering different stuff. So whatever realtor you start talking with, make sure they understand it's the land that's the most important aspect for you.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And so another thought was, if you say you do this research and you find some potential properties, the option of maybe just working with the landowner to lease the property to do, to do a project there or something like that, versus going all in on purchasing the property. Are there
There are,
examples of that?
yeah, there are options. There are actually even mentorship programs. I don't know if there's one currently um, going through the Thurston CD or not. Some CDs have a program that matches the older generational farmers to new farmers. Our farming community is aging, and they are looking for younger generation to come up. And some of those mentorships work out fantastic, where you learn the skills that the older farmer knows on that particular property. So that's an option too. So you're not going all in, because sometimes people think that it's a great thing to do, and then 2 or 3 years later they're going, oh my gosh, that is way more work than I thought. But I just saw somebody post in the chat. I'll be quiet, and I think Nora was trying to post something on that program.
Yeah, we have a program called Southbound Farmland that is a land matching program. I would say we do predominantly make more lease agreements through that program than sale agreements. The other thing I was going to add to your great answer here in terms of working with a realtor is, if you are working with someone, maybe say, hey, I'm interested in farmland. I have this great workshop you could watch as a demonstration of some of the things I'm concerned about, and give them the recording of this workshop. That is certainly an option as well, just to help them understand some of the things that you're really concerned about and make sure that that's very clear to them. Oh yeah, I see we got another chat in the question here. I see on the calendar, the South Sound Food System Network meeting. What's that about? So if you were looking at our website there, we have a community calendar that has both our internal events and some other community events listed on it. On our website, it shows up usually on the right-hand side of the website. The South Sound Food System Network is a community network that our staff participates in, usually myself, monthly. And it is kind of just what it sounds like. It's a bunch of organizations and groups, and sometimes individuals who are working in food systems work and are staying connected with each other monthly. Definitely the meetings are open to folks. So if someone is interested in joining, I'm happy to get them the link for the next one. I think it's usually the first Wednesday of the month at, I want to say 9:30. And they've been virtual right now, but it's a very friendly group of people. Thank you so much for joining us, Davey, and everyone else. If folks have other questions, questions about specific programs, either through NRCS or the Conservation District, we work closely together as two entities, often with the same landowner, and we're here as resources, so we can stick around for a little bit if you've got any other questions. Great, Karen, thank you for the feedback. Thanks, Charlene, I'm glad you were able to make it. Yes, wonderful. Thanks, Derek. Great. Yeah, you all have my contact information. So if questions come up after the fact, if I don't know the answer, I will just pass it along to these wonderful, smart people.